In the silence, a voice rises.
My girlfriend and I have always been the adventurous type, the kind of couple who feels restless if we're indoors too long. We chase daylight, chase trails, chase anything that lets us breathe in the wild air together. So on a whim, late one afternoon, we decided we'd pack up and disappear into the woods for a week. Neither of us works the kind of job with scheduled hours. Our time is our own. Even though technically we still answer to a bigger company. Freedom has always felt like ours to claim. We threw our bags in the truck and headed toward a state park, where you can camp for free as long as you don't stay more than 14 days. The road leading there was little more than a dirt trail, and I made the mistake, one I would regret more than anything, of not turning on the high beams. I wasn't thinking, and worse, I was driving far too fast for a place swallowed in darkness, and everything happened at once. My girlfriend screamed, and just a few feet ahead, a massive fallen tree appeared across the road. There was no room to swerve, no time for anything except slamming on the brakes. We still hit it hard. The world went black for a moment, no more than a few seconds, but long enough to change everything. When I came to, my head was foggy, and a ringing tore through my ears. My only thought was Jessica. I'll call her that for simplicity. I turned to her, and under the pale glow of the moon, I could see her eyes closed, her body still. I shouted her name, but she didn't move. I fumbled for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at her. I didn't know what I expected, but not what I saw. Blood. First, the blood. Her white shirt made it impossible to miss. And then I saw it, the branch. A thick limb, no wider than a finger, but horrifying all the same, had speared through the windshield and into her chest. It was still attached to the tree. I froze, terrified to touch her, terrified to make anything worse. I tried calling 911, no service. Not even a single bar. The truck wouldn't start, so even if driving away were possible, we were stranded. I had a knife, but it was small. Still, I climbed onto the hood and tried cutting the branch loose. The blade barely scratched it. Panic set in. 30 minutes had passed and she still hadn't regained consciousness. I crawled back inside and, for the first time since childhood, I prayed desperately, endlessly, begging for something to change. Nearly an hour after the crash, I felt her pulse weak, but that tiny rhythm kept me breathing. And then, as if someone answered every plea I'd made, light poured in from behind us. Headlights. I jumped out of the truck, shouting and waving. The driver stopped, rolled down his window, and asked what was wrong. I tried explaining, but the words tumbled out too fast, so I repeated them slower. His face shifted the moment he understood. He grabbed his flashlight, looked at Jessica, cursed under his breath, and told me the only chance she had was to cut her free and get her down the mountain to the EMT station. He had no signal either, but he had something else, a chainsaw. I hated the idea of how much the cutting might shake her, but there wasn't another option. He fired up the saw and started cutting about a foot away from her chest. I covered her with a blanket to shield the wound from sawdust. Her body vibrated slightly from the force, but she wasn't conscious to feel it. A small mercy, when the branch finally came free. He helped me lift her carefully and place her in the back seat of his truck. I climbed into the passenger seat and he tore down the mountain road. Jessica didn't stir once. It took 20 minutes to reach the EMT station, one I hadn't even known existed. The paramedics rushed her into an ambulance and I stayed by her side. The nearest hospital wasn't far, but it wasn't equipped for trauma, so she was airlifted to a larger city an hour away. The doctors told me she had a punctured lung but had miraculously avoided major blood loss. The branch had missed her heart by an inch, 1 inch between life and death. If it were any closer, she would have died within minutes. She remained in a coma for nearly 2 weeks, and when she woke, she could barely speak from the pain. She spent over 2 months in the hospital. Surgery helped, but her lung may still need a transplant someday. I'm just grateful she survived. I still talk to the man who saved her, and Jessica is home now, still on oxygen, still struggling to breathe sometimes. I take her to monthly appointments and hope one day she'll recover fully, though we've accepted that might never happen. I proposed to her while she was still in the hospital. She said yes. Whatever the future looks like, we'll face it together. I'll never forget that night. Sometimes I can't forgive myself for what happened, but I'm grateful she doesn't remember any of it. I've come to realize something about online dating. It can be absolutely chaotic. Before I say anything else, let me just start there. You scroll through pictures of strangers, chat for days or weeks, then meet up hoping the person standing in front of you is actually the one you saw on your screen. It's wild when you think about it. I really wish I had known all of this before I downloaded Tinder myself. I'd gone on a handful of dates with guys I met through the app, but nothing ever turned into anything real. Most of them were only looking for hookups or weren't ready to commit to anything serious. And sure, there were some total creeps out there, but I didn't run into them very often. Then months into having the app, I came across someone who honestly seemed too perfect to be real. He was ridiculously attractive, and when he messaged me, I felt this spark of excitement. As we talked more, I realized we had a lot in common, and he was funny and sweet in all the ways I had hoped for. From everything he told me about himself, he felt like the dream guy I'd been waiting for. After about a week of talking, he asked if I wanted to hang out. I suggested a bar near my place, my usual first date, safety net, but he preferred dinner. I typically went for drinks so that if things went sideways, I could leave quickly. But he seemed different, someone I actually wanted to impress. So I agreed. For the sake of anonymity, I'll call him Oliver. I planned to just drive myself to the restaurant, but he insisted on picking me up, saying it was the gentlemanly thing to do. I knew deep down it wasn't the smartest choice, but I ignored the voice in my head and gave him my address anyway. He said he'd be there at 7 p.m. the next evening, and honestly, I was thrilled. I told my friends about the date, and they all said I was crazy for giving my address to a guy I'd never met. I brushed it off, thinking they were just being dramatic. I started getting ready at 6, and right at 7, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and instantly felt disappointment hit me. He did not look like his pictures. Well, he was the same person, but he looked at least 10 or 15 years older than any of the photos he'd posted. Still, I kept quiet and decided to at least see how the night went. I'd liked his personality. After all, he opened the car door for me, got inside, and we began the drive to the restaurant, which was about 30 minutes away. As we drove, he told me I was gorgeous and even prettier than my pictures. Then, with the most uncomfortable smile, he asked, "What about me? Am I even more handsome than my photos?" I thought he had to be joking. There was no way he didn't know he looked completely different. I didn't know what to say, but my mom always told me to be honest. So I went with a half. I told him he looked good, then casually asked how long ago the pictures were taken. Instantly he got offended. His whole face changed, and I immediately apologized, telling him to forget the question. I hoped we could move past it, but he slid into a silent tantrum for the next 5 minutes, acting like a sulking child. Regret washed over me, regret for saying yes, and regret for letting him know where I lived. I kept track of the roads since I knew the way to the restaurant, and when he missed the turn, I told him to make a U-turn at the next intersection. He didn't answer. He passed the intersection. That's when fear crept in. Again, I told him he needed to turn around, and again nothing. He just kept driving, ignoring everything I said. I kept asking where he was going, what he was doing, but he wouldn't even look at me. We stopped at a red light, and I knew I needed to get out. I reached for the door, but it was locked. No unlock button. One of those locks that sink into the door so you can't pull them up. I was trapped. I quietly took out my phone and texted my friend my location, trying not to let him see. After a long stretch of driving, he pulled into an empty parking lot outside a grocery store. He parked far away from everything and everyone. I didn't know exactly what he intended, but I had a terrifying idea. I wasn't going to let that happen. He unbuckled his seatbelt. I reached into my purse. He lunged at me, grabbing my arms and trying to hold me down. I fought hard. I pushed against him, trying to free myself. Finally, he loosened his grip, and I grabbed my pepper spray, firing it straight into his face. The only problem, pepper spray in a closed car hits you, too. My eyes burned and tears poured instantly as he screamed beside me. He cursed at me, clawing at his face, and during the chaos, I managed to reach over, unlock the doors, and shove mine open. I tumbled out, scraping my knees on the asphalt. My chest felt like it was on fire from breathing in the fumes, and I could barely see. I tried to stand, but kept falling, dizzy and crying. I staggered across the parking lot, hearing his door open behind me. He yelled at me to come back. Through the blur, I saw him stumbling after me, wiping at his eyes. I screamed for help, but the lot was empty. As he approached, he shouted that he was just joking, that he didn't mean to scare me, that if I came back, we'd just go to dinner. He alternated between apologizing and screaming in pain. It was terrifying. Did he really think I'd believe that? He was nearly on top of me again when I reached the grocery store doors. They slid open, and as he yanked my shoulders, I screamed for my life. A man ran out from inside and shouted at Oliver to get off me. Oliver backed away immediately, and the man helped me up, trying to hold Oliver there. But there was no stopping him. He ran back to his car and sped off. The police were called right away. They told me they'd investigate, but nothing ever came from it. He was never found. I moved out of that house and back in with my parents. For a long time, I was terrified he'd show up, but so far, he hasn't. Now, I tell my story to warn others, women, men, anyone who dates online. You never truly know who you're meeting. People can and do intend harm, so please be careful. Never really intended to talk about this, but enough years have passed, and the fear that once clung to me has loosened its grip. So I suppose, why not? I was only 19 at the time, having moved clear across the country the year before for college. And until then, I'd never had a single issue driving home for school breaks. It was winter break, and my mom was desperate for me to come home that year, so we could actually spend the holidays together, something I'd skipped out on the previous year. I agreed, even though I didn't want to leave my car for weeks. The city I lived in had been dealing with constant car break, and the thought of returning to a vandalized or stolen car wasn't something I was willing to risk. I told my mom I'd be driving home, and even though she didn't love the idea, she understood. She offered to have my dad fly out and drive with me, but I didn't want them going through that. Honestly, a few days alone on the road seemed like exactly what I needed. My personal life had been a mess, and the quiet space to think felt like something I couldn't pass up. I packed a few bags for the next few weeks, said goodbye to my roommate who was upset to see me go, and headed out the door. Thinking back, my car wasn't worth what I went through. It was a 20-year-old Honda Civic that broke down constantly at least once a month, but I couldn't afford anything better, so it was all I had. I got in, hit the highway within minutes, grabbed some coffee to power through. And since it was only around 8 a.m., I figured I'd drive about 10 hours before finding a hotel for the night. No real plan, just following the fastest route home, which I now know was probably the worst choice. I should have taken the route that didn't leave me trapped on endless stretches of empty highway surrounded by nothing but fields. I stopped a couple times for snacks and bathroom breaks, and by around 7 p.m., I was completely wiped. After nearly 11 hours of driving, I didn't want to risk falling asleep behind the wheel. I found a decent hotel, checked in, slept, and continued the next morning. That day would take me through the Midwest, something I wasn't exactly thrilled about. The last time I drove through was nothing but flat land and cornfields, just miles and miles of sameness. It was winter now, so at least there wasn't corn, but the weather wasn't great either. Still, the day went smoothly. By 6 p.m., night had settled in, but I felt okay to keep driving. I passed through the next city and continued on. Then, around 7, I heard a knocking sound coming from the engine. My stomach dropped. It had started snowing, and my car slowed to a crawl until eventually I pulled onto the shoulder, where it died completely. With the heater off, the cold crept in fast. I checked Google Maps, no real towns nearby. The closest one, tiny as it was nearly an hour away. I tried calling my parents, no service. I used the emergency calls only option on my phone and thankfully got through, but the closest officer able to respond was over an hour away in that same small town. I told the dispatcher I'd wait, and she instructed me to lock the doors and hide myself as much as possible so it looked like nobody was inside. Apparently, the exact stretch of road where my car had died was known to be dangerous, especially for stranded young women. Hearing that made my skin crawl. I put up a sun shield on the front windshield and used 3 extras I had from car camping to cover the side and back windows. From the outside, the whole car probably looked pitch black. 30 minutes passed. Then this horrible sensation washed over me like someone was watching me. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. After all, no one could see it, but the feeling only grew stronger, deeper, heavier. Something inside me whispered that things were about to get very, very wrong. I turned on my phone screen and aimed it toward the windows, hoping to settle my nerves. At first, all I saw was my own reflection on the sun shield. I turned it toward the passenger side, and through a tiny, uncovered crack just big enough to see through, I froze. On the other side of the glass was a man's face, pressed against the window, smiling directly at me. I let out a scream. I didn't even know I was capable of mocking a raw animal sound that rattled my own ears. The second it left my mouth, the man lifted his face from the glass and began to laugh. Horrible, guttural laugh that twisted my insides. Then the car jolted as he yanked violently on the door handle, trying to get in. I sobbed as he continued circling the car, slamming himself against it, howling and laughing like something unhuman. I called 911 again, screaming that I needed help. The dispatcher this time wasn't the friendly woman from earlier. She kept yelling at me to stop screaming or she wouldn't be able to help me. I tried to calm down, even as the man outside banged on the window with something hard, something that sounded like it might break the glass. I begged her to believe me, but after 10 agonizing minutes, she accused me of pranking 911 and hung up. I felt completely helpless. The only small comfort was that he still hadn't made it inside. I called again, praying for someone else. A man answered this time, and he immediately understood how terrified I was. He talked me through my panic, got the information he needed, and told me the officer who had already been on the way for 45 minutes was now only about 10 minutes out. They'd rush him to me as fast as possible. I clung to that hope until I heard the unmistakable sound of a rock smashing against my windshield. The glass cracked, then shattered just enough for him to climb onto the hood and start stomping, forcing the windshield inward. I screamed and scrambled into the back seat. He ripped shards of glass aside, and when his face appeared again twisted, wild, it was even more horrifying than before. He began climbing through. I had no choice. I opened the back door, turned on my phone flashlight, and aimed it at him just in time to see that he'd gotten himself stuck. He thrashed, trying to free himself, but couldn't. and then thank God I saw flashing red and blue lights approaching. I ran toward them, waving frantically. The officer pulled up in seconds, and another patrol car arrived moments later. They put me in one of the vehicles and then drew their guns, shouting at the man wedged in my car. He screamed, thrashed, tried biting one of the officers when they pulled him out by his ankles. Eventually they slammed him to the ground, handcuffed him, and loaded him into the second car. They told me more officers would come to take photos of the scene, and that a tow truck would be on its way. Then they drove me to the station for my statement. I called my parents, and they bought me a plane ticket home. The officers were kind enough to drive me to the airport. I wish I could tell you the man gave a reason for what he did, but he didn't. They later said he was so mentally unstable that he wasn't even fit to stand trial. Eventually he was placed in a state mental hospital, where as far as I know, he still is. Some people would call that justice. But to me, it never felt like justice. He isn't the one being punished. I am. The memory of that night punishes me every day. It's easier now, but still they're haunting me whenever I remember the face in that window.
You've been listening to Voice in the Dark. If the shadows whispered to you tonight, don't forget to leave a like and step deeper into the darkness by subscribing.